Hey everybody, in today's video I'm going to go over some margin analysis in Excel and how you can do that. And I'm going to use Tesla's Q3 results from 2022 as an example. So I've downloaded the data from the company's most recent, the most recent earnings report as of now, just Q3. And I've got the revenue, the gross profit, the operating income, and the net income. So these are things that, at a broad overview, you may want to use that to see how the company is doing and how profitable it is. So you could select this data, go to insert, select the chart, and one of the recommended ones that Excel has for me is this funnel chart, which is useful when you're looking at margins because it shows you where you started from and how your margins have shrunk along the way, right? So we can see we've got revenue started at $21.454 billion. And then by the time we got to gross profit, we had $5.38 billion left. And then net income eventually ended out at $3.3 billion. So you can see that progression along the way. Now you might be tempted not to use revenue for the purpose of an income statement analysis, just because that for a lot of businesses anyway, cost of goods is going to eat up, 50, 60, 70% of revenue. So you're starting with an already significantly reduced piece of the pie here at gross profit. So it may make sense to start from gross profit and not include revenue. So that's something that, you could do. Right click, select data, and then adjust this range. So I'm just selecting the row below. There we go. So now I've got gross profit, operating income, and net income. So I've got that data in here. Now, one thing that may be a bit more useful, however, is to convert this into percentages. So rather than having these raw gross profit and net income and operating income figures, you can convert this into a percentage of revenue first. So just taking this, dividing it by this red value or this revenue value, freezing it, and then copy that down. And so now what I can do is just going to select these ones, not include the revenue item, and go back to inserting a chart again. And the funnel chart is still recommended. If it doesn't show up as a recommended chart, you can go to all charts, and you should see one at the bottom here for funnel, if it's available on your version of Excel. But if you're running Office 365, you should see it on there. So funnel chart selected, and so I've got that, but we want to right click, select data, and let's get rid of series 1, which is the first one that shows up here, and we just have series 2. So now we can see it's got 25% for the gross profit, operating income was 17%, and the net income was 16% of revenue. So this can be a bit more useful in the sense that you're working with percentages. The numbers may not be a whole lot meaningful if you don't know the context of sales. 5.4 million in gross profit may look good on sales of 21.45 billion, but what if the company's sales were over 100 billion? Then that gross profit number doesn't look nearly as impressive, and this is where using percentages is helpful to convey that. Now, one thing you can do to maybe adjust this chart to make it look a bit more compact is if I format the data series, there's an option for gap width here. So if you want to shrink this down to, let's say, 10%, make those bars a bit fatter and minimize the white space. But that's a quick way to create a funnel chart, just to analyze the margins for gross profit, operating profit, and net income as well. Next up, what I'm going to do is do the same sort of exercise, except this time factor in the company's expenses. So here I've got, instead of the margins and the subtotals, I've got the biggest costs for Tesla during the quarter, and that includes cost of revenue, research and development, SG&A, their net interest expense, and their taxes. And so what I'm going to do here is calculate a running total to see, okay, we started with $21.454 billion. How much is left after cost of revenue? How much is left after R&D, after SG&A, so on and so forth. So what I can do is take this value as my starting, and then take this and subtract the current line item, copy this down, and eventually I get down to that net income figure of $3.3 billion, because taxes is the last item before net income. So $3.3 billion, that's a match with this net income amount that I copied earlier. So that's also how you can check out to make sure that everything is calculating properly. And so here again, we run into that same situation where you may want to use percentage of revenue as what we're going to use to chart this out. Because again, you've got a huge drop from here down to 5.4. So we run into the same sort of issue. So let's do percent of revenue as well here. And just copy over the formatting. And again, let's take this, divide it by this. And so this one is going to be the same as the gross margin from above, just because cost of revenue is the only item before you head to the gross margin total. So that 25% is going to stay the same. But now we're going to get a bit more detail as to see, where there was a bit more leakage along the way, right? Where we saw the biggest drops. So what I'm going to do now is select, from cost of revenue, and here, select the chart. Let's go down to our funnel chart. And so get immediately right click, select the data to make sure I get rid of the first two series this time. And you could simplify this, by just having this this percentage of revenue off on its own, so it's not connected to this table, and that can make it easier for Excel to pick up exactly the one that you want. Okay, so by looking at this funnel chart, we can see that at cost of revenue, Tesla had 25.1% of its revenue, so you can interpret that as about 25 cents on the dollar. That's how much of revenue was left over after taking into account its cost of revenue. After R&D, you're down to 21.7 cents or 21.7%, depending on how you want to communicate that. After SG&A, you're down to 17.2. Then interest expense 16.9, and then taxes 15.5. So you see a bit more of a progression. You can see that, from R&D, from cost of revenue to R&D, there's a sizable jump, and then from R&D to SG&A, you lost around 4 percentage points, or more than 4 percentage points. So that's the benefit of using a funnel chart. In this case, it's visually easy to see the changes as you progress from a very large number to a smaller number, to see how and where your margins are shrinking along the way, where there are big differences or not so big changes along the way. Now, you could obviously chart this through a bar chart or a column chart, but with a funnel chart, it makes it a bit easier to sort of compress that and make it a bit easier to follow, especially if you're only looking at one period. In this example, I'm not comparing to a previous period or anything like that, so it's a lot easier to isolate it and just look at one period at a time. So that's how you can use a funnel chart in Excel. Thanks for watching.